The world watches with bated breath. Vladimir Putin, the enigmatic leader of Russia, holds the fate of nations in his hands. His actions reverberate across the globe, shaping the geopolitical landscape. To navigate this turbulent era, understanding Putin is not merely an academic exercise, it is a strategic imperative. Putin's motivations remain shrouded in secrecy. His pronouncements are often cloaked in ambiguity. This lack of clarity fuels uncertainty and apprehension. Western governments and policymakers grapple with interpreting his intentions, fearing miscalculations with potentially catastrophic consequences. The stakes have never been higher. Putin's actions in Ukraine have shattered the illusion of peace in Europe. The specter of nuclear escalation looms large, casting a long shadow over the world. To avert disaster, we must decipher the enigma of Putin. Understanding Putin requires delving into his past, his formative experiences, and the forces that shaped his worldview. Only then can we begin to anticipate his moves and formulate effective strategies to engage with Russia. In their seminal work, Mr. Putin, Operative in the Kremlin, Fiona Hill and Clifford Gaddy embark on a crucial mission to decode the mind of Vladimir Putin. Published in 2015 and updated in subsequent editions, the book provides a chillingly insightful portrait of the Russian leader. Hill and Gaddy, renowned experts on Russia, draw on their extensive knowledge of the country's history, politics, and culture to illuminate Putin's motivations and objectives. They meticulously dissect his speeches, writings, and actions, piecing together a comprehensive picture of his worldview. Mr. Putin is not simply a biography, it is a study in power, ambition, and the enduring forces that shape Russia's destiny. Hill and Gaddy argue that to understand Putin, one must first understand the historical and cultural currents that have shaped his thinking. The book serves as a stark warning against simplistic interpretations of Putin and his actions. Hill and Gaddy caution against viewing him solely through a Western lens, emphasizing the need to consider the historical grievances and strategic anxieties that inform his decision-making. Vladimir Putin's rise to power is a tale of ambition, ruthlessness, and cunning. His journey from a modest upbringing to the pinnacle of Russian politics is marked by a series of calculated moves and strategic decisions that reveal a man deeply committed to his vision of Russia's place in the world. Born in the shadow of World War II, his childhood in Leningrad left an indelible mark on his psyche. The city, now known as St. Petersburg, was a place of immense historical significance and cultural heritage, but it was also a city that bore the scars of war and hardship. The city's wartime suffering instilled in him a deep sense of patriotism and a profound distrust of the West. The siege of Leningrad, one of the most harrowing events of the war, was a defining moment for the city and its inhabitants, shaping their collective memory and identity. Putin's early career in the KGB, the Soviet Union's notorious intelligence agency, further shaped his worldview. The KGB was not just a job, it was a way of life, demanding absolute loyalty and a willingness to do whatever it took to protect the state. He honed his skills as a spy master, learning the dark arts of espionage, disinformation, and manipulation. These were not just professional skills, but tools that he would later use to navigate the complex and often treacherous waters of Russian politics. The KGB's culture of secrecy and suspicion became second nature to him. This environment fostered a mindset that valued control, surveillance, and the strategic use of information, all of which would become hallmarks of his political career. These formative experiences forged Putin into a master strategist, adept at exploiting weaknesses and manipulating perceptions. His ability to think several steps ahead, much like a chess grandmaster, allowed him to outmaneuver his rivals and consolidate his power. He emerged from the collapse of the Soviet Union determined to restore Russia to its former glory, driven by a belief in his own destiny to lead his nation to greatness. The chaotic 1990s, marked by economic turmoil and political instability, provided the perfect backdrop for his rise. His rise through the ranks of Russian politics was swift and calculated. From his early days in the St. Petersburg administration to his appointment as prime minister and eventually president, every step was meticulously planned. He consolidated his power, crushing dissent and silencing opposition. His tenure has been marked by a relentless pursuit of control, using both legal and extra-legal means to maintain his grip on power. His every move seemed carefully calibrated to enhance his authority and project an image of strength and decisiveness. Whether addressing the nation or engaging in high-stakes diplomacy, Putin's actions are always aimed at reinforcing his position and advancing his vision for Russia. Section 4. A worldview forged in shadows, Putin's zero-sum game. To comprehend Putin's actions on the world stage, one must grasp his deeply ingrained worldview. This perspective is not merely a product of his personal experiences, but is also deeply rooted in Russia's tumultuous history and its interactions with the West. Shaped by his KGB past and a profound sense of historical grievance, Putin views international relations as a zero-sum game. His years in the KGB, an organization known for its secrecy and suspicion, have instilled in him a mindset that sees the world in terms of winners and losers. In his eyes, any gain for the West comes at Russia's expense. This zero-sum mentality means that he perceives global politics as a constant struggle for power and influence, where one nation's success inevitably means another's loss. This worldview is rooted in a belief that Russia has been consistently undermined and betrayed by the West, particularly since the collapse of the Soviet Union. NATO expansion, which brought the alliance closer to Russia's borders, is seen not as a defensive measure, but as a direct threat to Russian security and influence. Western support for democracy movements in former Soviet republics, which Russia considers its sphere of influence, is viewed as an attempt to destabilize and weaken Russia from within. These movements are often seen as Western-backed efforts to install governments that are hostile to Russian interests. Perceived slights against Russian interests, whether real or imagined, have all fueled Putin's sense of resentment and suspicion. This has led to a foreign policy that is often reactive and defensive, aimed at countering what he sees as Western encroachment. Putin's zero-sum mentality leads him to interpret even seemingly benign actions through a lens of hostility. For instance, humanitarian aid or diplomatic initiatives by Western countries are often viewed with suspicion as potential tools for undermining Russian influence. He sees the West as engaged in a constant effort to encircle and weaken Russia, undermining its sovereignty and thwarting its rightful place on the world stage. Military exercises near Russia's borders and the presence of Western military bases in Europe are perceived as direct threats. This worldview has profound implications for global security. It creates a climate where mistrust and suspicion are the norms, making diplomatic resolutions and cooperation exceedingly difficult. It fosters a climate of mistrust and makes cooperation exceedingly difficult. Diplomatic efforts are often stymied by a lack of trust, and negotiations frequently end in stalemate or failure. Putin's belief that any concession to the West represents a loss for Russia fuels a dangerous cycle of escalation and confrontation. This zero-sum approach not only heightens tensions but also increases the risk of conflict, as both sides are less willing to compromise or find common ground. Section 5. Unmasking Putin's objectives, power, legacy, and the resurgence of Russia. Behind Putin's every move lies a calculated pursuit of strategic objectives. His actions are not random or impulsive, they are part of a grand strategy designed to achieve specific outcomes. While his tactics may shift, his overarching goals remain remarkably consistent: to restore Russia to its former glory, a vision deeply rooted in his understanding of history and national pride. Secure his place in history as a great leader, one who is remembered not just for his power, but for his ability to navigate Russia through turbulent times, and ensure the survival of his regime. This involves maintaining a tight grip on power, controlling dissent, and projecting strength both domestically and internationally. Putin's desire to revive Russia's global standing is deeply intertwined with his own sense of destiny. He sees himself as the person chosen to lead Russia back to greatness, a mission that he believes is his to fulfill. He yearns to erase the humiliation of the Soviet collapse, a period he views as a time of great national shame and loss. This historical wound drives much of his policy and rhetoric, and reassert Russia's position as a major power on the world stage. This ambition is not just about military might, but also about economic influence, cultural presence, and diplomatic clout. This ambition drives his aggressive foreign policy, which often involves bold moves that catch the world off guard. From military interventions to strategic alliances, every action is a step towards this grand vision. His willingness to challenge Western dominance, a stance that has earned him both admiration and animosity. He positions himself as a counterbalance to Western influence, advocating for a multipolar world, and his efforts to reassert Russian influence in its near abroad. This includes former Soviet states and regions where Russia has historical ties and strategic interests. Securing his legacy as a powerful and revered leader is another key driver of Putin's actions. He wants to be seen as the leader who restored Russia's pride and place in the world. He seeks to be remembered as the man who restored Russia's greatness, a leader who brought stability and prosperity after years of chaos and decline, who stood defiantly against the West, challenging its policies and asserting Russia's right to chart its own course, and who returned his nation to its rightful place in the world order. This vision of a resurgent Russia is central to his identity and his leadership. Finally, Putin's actions are motivated by a fundamental instinct for self-preservation. He is acutely aware that his personal fate is tied to the fate of the nation. He understands that his grip on power is inextricably linked to Russia's strength and stability. Any sign of weakness, whether economic, political, or social, any hint of internal dissent, is a direct threat to his rule. This is why he takes such a hard line against opposition, and why he invests heavily in security and surveillance, could threaten his regime's survival. In Putin's view, maintaining control is not just about power for its own sake, but about ensuring the continuity of his vision for Russia.